Hey there, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is David Dubin. I am excited to have you here for the webinar today. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be on for about 30 to 45 minutes. And before this webinar ends, I'm going to show you the best, most effective way to get your hiring managers to conduct your interviews your way. And this includes how you can make personalized, targeted behavioral interview questions in just 5 minutes. As you probably know, it is a crazy hiring market right now. So I'm just excited to give you some tools to hopefully make it a little bit easier. Now, I want to thank everyone for being here. Remember, for everyone who stays till the end, you are going to get SHRM HR credit. So make sure you stay to the end so you can get that professional license credit for free. Just so you know, this is a recorded webinar. So I won't be able to answer questions live today, but if you have some questions, just write those questions down. I'm going to share my information at the end so you can email me with any questions or comments you might have. But that's it. Let's get started. Let's start rolling, okay? My name is David Dubin. I have a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. And I've been helping organizations with employee pre-hire and development for over a decade. I'm a principal at People Strategies. This is a company devoted to helping organizations with people-related business issues, including pre-hire assessment, leadership development, performance management, employee engagement, and really a host of other kinds of people strategies. Here's some additional kind of info about me. So my advisor and mentor in graduate school was named Jim Campion, and he was one of the forefathers of structured interviewing. And since graduating, I've been doing interviewing trainings in oil and gas, nonprofit, healthcare, and a variety of other industries. But this webinar that you're on right now is actually a little bit different from those. Here, we're not just going to talk about structured interviewing, we're going to talk about how to get others to use it. All right, so now that's enough about us. It's great to have you all here. Let's get started with a question. Have you or one of your hiring managers ever made a bad hire? Now, I've asked this question to hundreds of HR folks, hundreds of hiring managers, and I will say that 100% of the people I've talked to will answer yes to this question. The only people who won't say yes are people who have never hired other people. And you're probably saying yes right now, and that's no surprise because people are complicated and the dynamics of your workplace are complicated too. So, as an interviewer, you and your hiring managers are being asked to make really, really big decisions without that much information. So, the key to this webinar is going to be how do we get hiring managers to use the most accurate, professional, and proven interview process, which is the structured interview process, so that they can make the right hire the first time. And by the way, this strategy that I'm going to show you works for other things too. But let's start with this. I think that the paradox with interviewing is that without understanding the science behind it, hiring managers tend to either go too casual and basically just ask any question that comes to their mind, or they over rotate and they get really specific and they ask these very like wild, specific questions that they think are job relevant, like in the comic in the presentation. And that's why Harvard Business Review found that companies end up spending an enormous amount of money on hiring, usually about $4,000 per job in the US, and many, many times more than that for managerial roles. And as you probably know, if the employee leaves in the first 90 days, you don't get any of that money or time back. It's all a waste in training and onboarding. So the interview is the place where you can really pinpoint the best fit for the role if it's done right. But we know that hiring managers don't often like to follow the script. And today, we're going to show you how to convince them to interview candidates the right way. So that brings us to the big goal of today's webinar. Get your hiring managers to use the structured interview process and convince them to do other things that you want them to do too. And this will in turn streamline and enhance the applicant experience during the interviews so you and they can increase your quality of hires. I definitely want to thank you again for being here. So for everyone who stays till the end, not only will you get SHRM HR credit, you are also going to get an infographic that you can print out for your hiring managers for free. This will be a gift for free, just staying until the end, and it will make a huge impact on your hiring turnover. Now, we'll take a look at it later on the presentation. I think it's going to be a great resource and jumping off point for your hiring managers to get on board with your plan to use evidence-based hiring. So let's talk about the secrets to convincing your hiring managers that your interview process is the way to go. Now, I know from our live webinars in the past that we always have a huge variety of types of businesses join us with all kinds of products and services that they sell. And you might be thinking, with your own kind of unique products and services, will this even apply to my situation? Well, in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to show you how you can use these secrets to convince your hiring managers to make the change that you want to see, no matter what type of business, how small or how big your company is, how much turnover you've had, or any other obstacles you think might get in your way. We are going to solve these issues with 3 secrets. Secret number 1, educating them. Secret number 2, making it easy. Secret number 3, holding them accountable. Now you might say, wait a minute, this sounds way too simple. But you know what? The fact is that there's a little nuance to each secret that is going to make the difference between success and failure. So I want you to start imagining. Imagine if you could get your hiring managers to actually adopt the proven evidence-based practices that you know lead to hiring the best candidates and reducing turnover. Imagine if even one of your hiring managers changed the way they hired. What kind of effect could that have on your company's culture? What kind of effect could that have on the way that people feel about your company, whether they're new arrivals or people who have been there for a while? And what kind of impact can that have on your HR team when they're not having to deal with this kind of revolving door because of these rogue interviewers you're having? That's what we're going to focus on today. So let's dive in and get started. Now, the first secret is education, and that starts with a good interviewer training program. Now, whether you create it or you purchase an online module, any solid organizational change initiative, and that's what this is, it's an organizational change initiative, starts with education. And that's what the secret is all about. So with any training, whether it's my training or yours, we are shifting the way your hiring managers think about and practice interviews from what they may think of as a natural ability into what we know it is, which is a learned skill. So let me tell you what I mean by this. When I educate people on interviewing, I focus on 3 broad areas, which I cover in the infographic you'll get at the end of this presentation. The first is, why should you care? Why should you care about doing this the right way? The second is, how can things go wrong? What does the wrong way look like? And we talk about cognitive biases. And the third, of course, once we've convinced them that things can go wrong, and they do go wrong, is how do we do it right? So let's dive into each part of my training so you can see what's involved. When I start training people on anything, I start with why they should care. But it's important to know that people are impacted by information in different ways. Some people really like stories and emotion, and some people just say, show me the numbers, and they really only care about ROI and statistics. So first, it's important to know what kind of people you're speaking to, and then tailor your motivation or persuasion technique accordingly. So let me give you an example of a true personal story that I use, and it's something that you could use too, or you could use it as you craft your own story. So rewind a decade or so. At the beginning of my career, I was helping a small clinical psychology practice hire a receptionist. At that time, the owners got in their head that they needed to find a receptionist who had experience working in a psychologist's office. Now, that very unique criteria, mixed with the fact that they weren't paying very well, really narrowed down the applicant pool, to the extent that when there was someone who had worked in a psychologist's office before and they seemed reasonable on first meeting, they didn't want to slow down the hiring process and possibly lose that person with the structured interview. And besides, the owners had a very strong feeling that this person, we're going to call her Hannah, was going to fit in. She seemed very confident during the first interview, which really wasn't an interview. It was just more of a meeting. She seemed kind and warm-hearted. So they hired her without any additional interviews or assessments. All right, so let's fast forward a month, only a month, and Hannah has downloaded software that infected all the computers in the practice with ransomware. She cried almost every day and routinely failed to schedule patients appropriately. So it was clear that she didn't have the cognitive or the emotional capacity to do the work that needed to be done. But at this point, it was even more difficult to find a replacement because so much time was spent training and retraining Hannah. And it was a very expensive, a very long term, a very emotionally draining mistake. And honestly, it all could have been avoided by asking the right questions. So, what I'm trying to do in this example is have the hiring manager imagine what it would be like to make a poor hire. I'm focusing here on mistakes that they might make. For example, setting up criteria that is too specific and maybe not job relevant, and also just trusting their gut instead of doing a full interview process. I'm also providing specific examples of how hiring poorly can drain resources from the company and from the hiring manager. Now, this tends to work well, but you can also ask the hiring managers what their specific key performance indicators are, or KPIs, and explain how those could be affected. So, for example, for sales managers, I'll usually ask, what was the cost of the last bad hire you made? Now, usually they're already thinking in dollars and cents, but if they don't have an answer, I'll say, did that person meet their sales quota? And if not, did it affect the team's sales goals? So for these types of people, those who are into KPIs and other data and statistics, I just present the facts. So for example, if you're looking at return on investment, research shows that unstructured interviews, so kind of like random questions or gut feelings, are just plain old poor predictors of performance. So structured interviews help select better candidates even after assessments have been used. And honestly, the ROI, this is based on research, of implementing a structured interviewing process is conservatively estimated at 380%. Well worth it. And that part of that is because the replacement cost for a bad hire runs between 1 to 5 times the annual salary of a position. And also, a lot of people don't realize this, but actually structured interviews are just a lot faster to complete than unstructured interviews because you know exactly what you're going to ask and you're not just constantly pulling questions out of the air. Now, from a legal side, which also is somewhat financial, it's important to know that legal complaints related to interviewing can cost organizations up to $670,000 and more. These are out of court settlements. And unstructured interviews are just more likely to result in out of court settlements and issues because you're asking questions that you haven't fully vetted. Now, all of this information is going to be on the infographic that I present at the end, so no need to write any of that down. Now, next in the training, I focus on why things can go wrong. So when you don't follow the methods we learn in the training, here I bring up some of the more relevant cognitive biases that can occur in an interview. And I have each trainee provide an example of how this might happen to them. And just to give you a flavor of that, let me talk you through a bit of that now. So first of all, just to explain, a cognitive bias is basically when people jump to a conclusion. And it's especially common in an interview because we constantly make judgments when talking to people. Think of this as like an evolutionary strategy needed to find out if new people were going to be a friend or an enemy back in cave people time. So we needed to quickly decide, is this a friend or is this a foe? And this is actually a good segue into the first cognitive bias, which is the halo effect. The halo effect is the tendency to extend one positive trait about someone to all traits, even if they're unrelated. So if we think about Hannah in our example, because she had experience working in a psychologist's office, the owners assumed she would be everything that they were looking for, which obviously turned out not to be true. And this also works in the opposite direction, which we call either the negative halo or the horns effect. The compare and contrast effect is relating every person you're interviewing to the other people you've interviewed. Now, comparing candidates is a good thing. That's why we're all here. When we interview, we're comparing candidates, we're trying to pick the best one. But as an example, if the last person that you interviewed had the best answer you ever heard to a certain question, then even an above average answer on a future interview can sound bad comparatively. So what happens then if that first candidate doesn't accept? Now everyone looks bad, even though if you were to look at them by themselves, they would have looked like they were above average. That's the compare and contrast effect in action. The just like me effect is the tendency for people to look like that look like you to be. This just like me effect is the tendency for people to like other people that are similar to you, either because you look the same, went to the same school, or a variety of other reasons. And of course, these reasons are rarely job related. So after I provide my own explanations and own examples, I have the hiring managers being trained think through an example on their own instead of just hearing me talk about it, which further solidifies the information. So I've created an online course where I teach all of these elements of a structured interview, walk them through examples, have them practice with more thinking exercises like the one we just did with cognitive biases. So let me walk you through some of the areas that I cover in the training to give you a sense of what a comprehensive training program looks like. This is the basic outline of the training I've delivered to hundreds of hiring managers around the country. And this 1-hour training provides hiring managers with all the skills that they need to conduct a comprehensive structured interview. Now, first, as I talked about earlier, I like to focus on educating them about structured interviewing, why it works, making sure to personalize it to the organization by having trainees think about what a good hire looks like in their organization. I then go into the more technical components of structured interviewing, going over the 4 main components of the interview, as well as providing them with tools for what to do if things aren't going so well. Now, I've been doing these trainings for over 10 years, and I'm proud of the trainings we've created at People Strategies because it has a great balance of information and participation, and it really delivers all the research-based knowledge we've developed as an organization. Again, the type of interview structure I like to train hiring managers to use provides a friendly and professional experience for the candidate. Now, especially when you compare it to a hiring manager trying to think about what questions they're going to ask on the fly, the structured interview process provides much better applicant experience. And this is important because the interview is both a selection and a recruitment process. You are trying to determine if a candidate would be a good fit for your organization, but the candidate is also determining if the organization is going to be a good fit for them. So just to hit this home, 82% of candidates say that a negative interview experience can change their mind about a role they liked or a company that they once admired. So this is important, not just as a hiring manager who's trying to fill their headcount, but as a company in general whose applicants use their products and services. And in a tight labor market like the one that we're all in right now, it's even more critical for your reputation with applicants. You want to be the place applicants are excited to apply to because they know that the process is efficient and professional. So you may be thinking, okay, how can I make sure that my hiring managers are following this structured interview process after I've spent the time training them and I know that they have the knowledge? Because we can educate these people out the wazoo, but you're not in the room when they're interviewing most of the time. And you often don't see what questions they're going to ask ahead of time. So besides training, how can I make sure you or your hiring managers use this process and stay out of trouble in the interview? And also don't accidentally overlook that rockstar candidate. This is why secret number 2 is so important. By providing your hiring managers with training on how to use a structured interview, you're showing them how to avoid bias and really focus on the behavioral and personality characteristics that are important to success in the role. But training often isn't enough to move people to change. You may have experienced this yourself. You go to a training, or you listen to a podcast, or you read a book. Maybe you go to a webinar like this one. And at the end, you're fired up to make a change. But somehow, after a few days, you revert to your old habits or your old beliefs. So the question becomes, how can we make it easy for your hiring managers to use structured interviews so that structured interviews are actually a lot less work than asking questions they invent or Google on the internet and can easily become their default option? Well, this is where nudging comes into play. Now, you may have heard about nudge theory, first described by Nobel Prize winning economist Richard Thaler. A nudge helps people make better choices for themselves without technically restricting their freedom of choice. It just makes it easier for people to make a specific, usually better decision. So, for example, this picture in the PowerPoint shows a voting ashtray in a UK park. It makes it easier and also a lot more fun for smokers to throw away their used cigarette butts rather than throwing them on the ground. And these innovative ashtrays have proven to reduce cigarette litter by 74%. So we want to apply this theory to your hiring managers to make it easy for them to choose the structured interview process. Let's nudge them in the right direction so that the best choice for interviewing is also the easiest choice for them to choose and use. So to apply this theory to the hiring process, we as HR leaders or other kinds of leaders can make it easy for hiring managers by providing interview guides to them. This reduces the effort hiring managers must expend and makes it easier to make the decision to use the structured interview process. So if the interview questions can be selected by them from a list that matches the job description they're hiring for, or if they are already selected and the interview guide can just be printed out for the hiring managers, or even easier, read from a tablet with the ability to take notes during the interview, there is a much greater chance of the hiring managers choosing to use this process. Just to hit this home, I want to show you an example of an interview guide that does this quite well. So bear with me while I try and share my screen here. All right, so I'm going to share what a good interview guide looks like right now. And so as you can see, we've got an interview guide protocol right here. So what we're suggesting is you create an interview guide or have them co-create an interview guide with you and then send that to them before the interview. And in this particular one, what you see is on page 2, you've got reminders to how to conduct a good structured interview. So it kind of boosts their knowledge that they got on their training course and reminds them, hey, this is the right way to conduct an interview. Then if we scroll down, we have our competencies, which helps us to describe what good looks like on the job, and the questions that help us get information about where this candidate is on that competency. It provides some probing questions to make sure that they're getting a full story from the candidate, a place to take notes, and you have scores on the bottom so that there are specific ways to compare other candidates. Further, a good interview guide will have these, which are behavioral anchors. It provides context on what a good score looks like and what a bad score looks like. So if you combine all of these things and you send it to the interviewer beforehand, then they're much more likely to use it and you're much more likely to get interview results without any kind of bias. So let me go back to the presentation here. Now, in my experience, one of the reasons why I push this so hard is because I've worked with hiring managers who were just Googling interview questions, just saying whatever came to their head. And one time, because sometimes I talk to applicants too, I spoke to an applicant who just hijacked the interview by turning every question he heard into a question for the interviewer. Now, this sounds like a joke, but it's real. And what's even stranger is that he ended up getting that job without answering a single question. By just repeating everything that the interviewer said, it sounded like he was really very much on their side and very inquisitive about the things that were most important to the interviewer. So without having a strict kind of protocol to say, this is what good looks like, those kinds of things can happen. So it all goes to say that providing the hiring manager with the interview guide is just as easy for the hiring manager, and it's scientifically proven to select better candidates. So this is all awesome and great, but still, how do you know that the hiring managers are actually using this super easy process that you've provided to them? You still may not be in the interview room. This is where secret number 3 comes in. Now that we've educated our hiring managers on the right process and we've made it easier for them to use it, I'd love to say that we can just trust them to do the right thing, but we can't. The sad truth is that with limited resources on our time and attention, people are unlikely to change from the status quo unless there is something or someone pushing them to. So for the psychology fans out there, this is called conservation of resources theory. And I know this because my professor would cite this every time he gave our class a quiz or a big test. He said, if I don't quiz you, if I don't hold you accountable, I know that you will immediately just shift your attention to something that is calling for your attention more, whether it be another class or something fun outside of school. So you need that kind of accountability. And what does this mean for interviewing? Well, it means that if you assign interviewing training, there should be some way for you to, one, make sure that they completed it, and two, check their knowledge in the area. It also means that you should be able to go back and make sure that they appropriately use the interview protocol that you either co-created or made for them. And finally, it means that if there are performance issues with a new hire on an area they were assessed on in an interview, you can go back to the interview, read the notes of this question, and determine what went wrong. So obviously the point of this isn't to be punitive, but your ability to do this signals that one, you care about the success of the hiring process, and two, you want to continue to iterate it with them and make it better. So before we move on, I want to show you the infographic that I referenced at the beginning of the presentation. After all we've discussed, I know you're planning to educate your hiring managers, training them on structured interviewing and getting them on board using the motivational techniques that we discussed. So what I'm about to show you is a PDF you can print out or email to your hiring managers to reinforce what they'll learn in the training. It also provides them with a quick reference to remotivate them to keep using the process by showing them the impact that they're making on hiring. So let me just share that briefly so that you can get a look at it, and I'll also explain everything that's happening in there as well. So what's coming up on the screen now, you can see it says structured interviews, a roadmap for success. So on the top portion of this, we're showing you all of the statistical ROI of why it's important to do structured interviews. So all the way from the ROI being 380% to the replacement cost of a bad hire being 1 to 5 times as much as the annual salary, and even the out-of-court settlements that you might face if you ask any illegal questions, all the way up to $670,000. And that was, over a decade ago, so it's much more now. Now, if we look below this, it gives you some information about how do you create a good structured interviewing process. The kind of 4 steps is you want to develop a competency model. A competency model is just, what does good look like? Like, what does it look like when someone's doing a good job and a bad job? Those differentiators are your competencies. Then creating the interview questions to support those competencies. So how do we ask a question so that we know whether somebody is competent in this particular area or not? We use these behavioral questions. How do you conduct an interview so that you are creating a professional kind of rapport with them, but you're also getting the information that you need and that you're writing down the information so that you can score it later? And all of this just goes to giving you job relevant information that is unbiased, so that if you have different people interviewing the same person, you should get pretty much the same score. That's what this is all about. That's why structured interviews are so effective, because it reduces bias. So let's go back to our slides here. And again, I'm going to share this at the end of the presentation in the chat so you can download your own copy and send it out. So by now, you know that if you implement a structured interview process, it will change the way your company hires, and it'll almost guarantee a drop in turnover. But it might feel a little overwhelming, especially if you or your hiring managers are already struggling with a large workload and don't have the time or the energy to revamp a process like this. In fact, Glassdoor found that the amount of time employers spend on interviews has almost doubled since 2009. And this study was actually done back in 2019, before the pandemic. So I know, at least from my clients, that it feels like the workload has gone up even more. So what I want to do now is I want to walk you through how I put these secrets into action in a seamless way with my digital interview guide builder. So I want to show you how you can quickly build an interview guide, share it with your hiring managers, and even review it to see how an interview went, what the hiring manager's notes are, their scores are, so that you can continue to iterate as you move along there. So again, I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me while I do that. All righty. All right, so this is the digital interview guide, and I want to just walk you through this program and show you how I can hit home these 3 secrets that I presented at the beginning of the webinar and help you make a perfect interview with just 4 steps in less than 5 minutes. So let's say we're going to make an interview for a new sales associate, and I'll just type in the name, the job code, how many guides I want to make, and what the job level is. Now, to make this simple, I'm going to just say 1 guide, but the beauty with multiple guides is you can assign different interview questions to different people. Like, for example, a recruiter who might ask more screening questions and a hiring manager who might ask more technical questions. All right, so I'll click next so that we can go to step 2. And in this section, I'm going to select competencies related to this position. So this goes back to what I mentioned in the interview training portion of the presentation. You need to figure out what good looks like in a role in an organization. So assuming that your hiring manager is a subject matter expert on the role, that person can co-create this with you and help you define what good looks like in the role. So now you're building a bespoke interview guide and getting buy-in from the hiring manager at the same time. Now here, there are over 25 of the most commonly used competencies, and they've all been created by PhD level practitioners. But if you had your own competencies, you can also add them in on another screen. So with this particular role, we're doing a sales associate. I know that building relationships is going to be important. I know that persuading others is going to be important. Sales focus obviously is going to be important for a sales associate. And also demonstrating confidence is going to be very important. So these are the 4 competencies I'm going to concentrate on for this particular job position. So I'll just click next and we'll go into step 3. Now here, I'll add questions within each competency. So all of the appropriate questions are housed under each competency, and there are over 300 research-based questions that you have to choose from. Now, if you already have great questions, you can add them individually in this question page here, or we can upload all of them for you at once so you have them at the ready. Now, this section is really great because you and your hiring managers don't have to come up with these interview questions yourself or find them on the internet. And they've all been created and vetted by experts in the area. So you don't have to worry about off-the-wall questions that could get your organization in trouble. And again, if you use this as an opportunity to build this together with the hiring managers that you have, then you get the advantage of both quality and buy-in. So if we look through these questions, I'm going to choose the second one on building relationships. Tell me about a time when your listening skills helped you better facilitate a conversation or meeting. In persuading others, I think I'll pick this one. Tell me about a time when you had to convince an individual to do something you knew he or she might initially resist. And I'll also do this one. Tell me about a time when you successfully influenced the sale or expansion of a business with a customer. And then just here, sales focus, I'll go and click this last one. Tell me about a time when you were held responsible for meeting a sales quota or a business development goal. I always love this one for a new sales person, someone who's new to the field, because sometimes they don't realize that they're being held to that kind of responsibility and goals. And for demonstrating confidence, I'll just pick this third one. Tell me about a time when you were hesitant to make a suggestion during a project. I want to see kind of the levels of their hesitation and how confident they are. So then we click next, and in this last step, you can create your own questions. Again, you could have added your own questions before, but you have a chance to do it here as well. Now, this is usually where I like to add some information about the role and ask if it's similar to anything they've done previously. In this case, I'm just going to click finish. And then if you click here, then you have your PDF. And if all you wanted was a PDF to send around and use in paper form, then you're done. And you can see how seamless it is to use this product. It would actually take more time for you or your hiring managers to come up with bad questions and put it in a document. But again, these are all PhD written and curated research-based questions. And now you've got an interview you can send to all your hiring managers and standardize that interview process, which is so important in reducing bias, increasing diversity and inclusion, and really just making candidates like you more. And this is, by the way, the same kind of interview guide that I showed you earlier on that reminds on the second page how to best conduct a structured interview. So it has elements of the first secret that after they've already gone through a training. And now if you want to go a step further and assign interview guides to different people and have all of the interviewing information kept on the site and all of the accountability that goes with it, we can do that by publishing the guide, going to the candidates tab, clicking the add button. And let's say, for example, that we've got a Jon Snow coming in. And let's say he'll come in at the end of the month. And we've got, let's say it's the Night's Watch. And we're going to do an interview panel, which we can do here. And so what we do is we add the people who are going to be the interview. We quickly select the interview that we just made. And then we add the candidate. And now every one of those people who are in the interview panel are going to get sent an email that invites them to the interview. And in fact, they don't even have to be a user on the platform to start the interview. And all of the data is going to be stored right here on the platform. So this is the part that makes it easier for your hiring managers, because the interview is sent right to them and they can use it right on their computer or tablet. And if you store this information on the platform, you can easily go back in and see the notes, scoring, and recommendation information on the interviews that have already been done. So just to give you an example of that, if we go back to an interview that's been done on Taylor Swift, we can see some of the notes, or lack thereof, the scores, and everything else that's important for this person. So we see that, for example, this person is good at building relationships.
Daddy, can you turn off the light in my room?
All right. Olin, can I finish this thing?
Why? Why?
So if she's scoring high on building relationships, but she doesn't appear to do that well on job, then I know there is a problem with the interviewer or the interview question, and it's something I can follow up with. So again, this is the easiest way to get great job-related questions for your interview faster than if you were just making them up. And it makes it easier for hiring managers, so they have no excuse not to use it. And if they use the interview on the platform, you can go in and check how they're using it and validate whether the interviews and interviewers are working well. So it's all of the 3 secrets rolled up into one platform. So let's go back to sharing the slide deck here. So we built the interview guide builder to make the process of interviewing as easy as possible for you and your hiring managers. So today, as a thank you for joining me on this webinar, I'd like to provide you with a special offer that you can only get by attending this webinar. First, you'll get a no strings attached free trial of the interview guide builder so you can test it out and see how it can work to streamline and enhance your interview process. The trial includes unlimited interview guides, unlimited job positions, unlimited users, and access to past interviews and scores, over 300 research-based items, and more than 25 competencies. If you like it, which I'm confident you will, you'll then be signed up for a monthly subscription that includes the same unlimited features. And if you don't like it, you can email me or press a couple of buttons to easily cancel. I truly only want you to keep it if you use it and you love it. That's who my clients are made up of. Plus, as a bonus for signing up today, I will personally create your first interview guide based on just a job description that you send to me. So if you don't currently have an interview guide or yours needs a refresher, all you have to do is sign up today. That's a total value of $997 that you'll get for free if you sign up today. So I'll release that offer right now. All right, I just released it, and you can find that link in the chat. I encourage you all to check it out. I'm also going to release that infographic that I promised you earlier. You can download that now as well, and you can find that in the chat. Now I'm going to talk through some of the most common questions I've received after this webinar. And if you still have any questions after this, you can see my email below, which I'll also put in the chat, which is david@peoplestrategies.com. All right, that's in the chat too. You can feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I'm happy to talk with you further and explain anything. So one common question is, do you have any other trainings for managers available? Yes, we do. We offer trainings on interviewing, on how to use pre-hire assessments appropriately, and a training on how to deliver feedback, which can be a scary thing for new managers. Another question that comes up a lot is, how do we measure fit within a company culture? Well, first, what you need to do is decide what your company culture is. You need to describe the values that are important in your company. So, for example, inclusivity, work life balance, focus on results, those kinds of things. Once you've done that, you need to define what each value means. What does it look like for someone who is high in inclusivity, for example? And what does it look like when they are low in that kind of value or skill? The way to do this is to ask subject matter experts, ask leaders, since fit and culture usually comes from the top, and ask employees, what does this mean to you? Tell me about a time when someone did this really well and when they did this really poorly. And those situations can then become your interview questions that you ask and can measure fit. Another way to do this is through a realistic job preview, which is another training I offer. A realistic job preview provides a description that's really great about the organization and things that are not so great. So in other words, you are providing elements of the job that cause people to stay and some to leave. So for example, long hours or dealing with difficult clients are all examples of things that might cause people to leave. And this realistic job preview is great to provide at the end of the interview. And you can usually follow it up by asking the interviewee if they have dealt with these situations in the past. And not only will it help you identifying people who will be a good fit for the culture and really want to be there, it also helps interviewees to select out if they know they won't be a good fit. And you want people to select out before they come into the position and spend time being trained. Another common question is, what are the other areas we can improve during the hiring process besides interviewing? So the way a hiring process typically goes is it's like a funnel. It starts with the recruitment process at the top of the funnel, which is wide. Everyone who is interested in the position goes into that wide part of the funnel. Then you can implement the pre-hire assessments, which are a way to identify where each applicant objectively falls on different traits that are important to you, such as attention to detail, how much they like to team, how compassionate or stress resistant they are. And these assessments are a good way to weed out people that are just an obvious wrong fit with the position. It also frees up time so that the interview is spent only with people who performed well on those assessments. It gives the interviewer more time back and higher quality candidates. The assessment narrows the pool of candidates, the bottom of the funnel, so that you conduct less interviews or fewer interviews. Another question is, do you recommend personality inventories or any other tools to be combined with the interview? Yes, I definitely do. Like I just mentioned, I really recommend that companies use pre-hire assessments in combination with the interview. So when I say assessments, specifically what I'm looking for in an assessment is something that's competency-based rather than some kind of general personality inventory. You should find an assessment or create one with a qualified vendor like People Strategies that looks at specific personality traits that will be relevant to the position and predictive of performance on the job. Such an assessment can weed out candidates that are obvious poor fits, but also provides additional information for the interviewer. You can then probe on these areas of the assessment that you may have questions about. So for example, if they measure outside of a range on a competency, you can ask additional questions in the interview to really figure out the level of their skill or personality in that area. Another question that comes up a lot is, what number of interviews are ideal when hiring? So in the current hiring market, the least number of interviews you can do and still get accurate information is the ideal number. Because what we're concerned with right now is applicants leaving and going to a different company that has a more efficient process. The real question is, how much information can you get from the number of interviews that you do, and how many people really need to meet this person? I would advocate for less interviews and use a panel interview process so you have more stakeholders there who can assess the person, but not overload the applicant's schedule with interviews. All right, those were the most popular questions I received in previous webinars. Now I would like to invite you to like or follow our LinkedIn group so you can stay up to date on our thinking about people strategies, and so you'll never miss a great webinar like this one. I will add that link as well as a pop-up in the chat. Thank you so much for attending. For those who attended the full webinar, look for the SHRM activity code in the email that will be sent out within the next day. I'll also include a link to the replay of the webinar, which will be available for the next week. Please email me if you have any questions about anything we discussed or about hiring in general. We're happy to help and get to know you and your organization better. So thank you so much for your kind attention, and we look forward to speaking to you live soon. Bye-bye.